Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. Whether or not you agree with me about the religious implications, I'm sure we can all agree that every person with sense can agree that my arguments are universally sound. I have many points that tell you my official stance on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but in this video, I'm going to go through the first 14 points alone. Point number one. I maintain that there are rich groups of globalists that are manipulating both sides. Many of them are in the UK and America. Point number two. I want the bombing campaign to stop immediately. Point number three. I want the hostages released. Point number I want the hostages released, and also I added that all Palestinian children should be released immediately and they should be given a clean slate. Point number four. If Israel is to invade, they should do it quickly so that people can return home to Gaza quickly. Obviously, this reduces, the amount of casualties and so on and so forth. They just get the hostages, get out of there. They killed lots of people, not that I agree with it, but that makes it clear that they don't need to do much more, okay? Just like they couldn't destroy ISIS, it's ridiculous to think that they can destroy Hamas. So they're starting a long campaign that either they don't intend to finish and they just intend to kill people out of emotion, or they intend to keep going like the war in Afghanistan, and then maybe 20 years later they'll somewhat stop, like the war with ISIS. Okay, and that's obviously ridiculous, because so-called terrorist organizations aren't the only criminals and people who kill people and so on and so forth on the planet. So why single them out, right? Okay, so point number 5. I think the Egyptian solution, what I call the Egyptian solution, is ideal. It consists of $110 billion to build tiny homes in a city in Egypt, with 1 million tiny homes and small homes for families with running water and AC. They could build a police station there, have UN troops there, an Egyptian military outpost there, and the Egyptian government would get the tax revenue of these new citizens and the job programs that we provide, and $10 billion for taking them in. Okay, so there's lots of financial incentive for them, and they could sort of solve the problem. I think that they're likely to not want to do it for the reasons that have to do with the point number 1, right? I maintain that there are rich groups of globalists that are manipulating both sides. Many of them are in the UK and America. So let's kind of review these first 5 points really quickly here. So there's bankers, there's war profiteers, there's pharmaceutical companies, IT infrastructure companies, petrochemical companies, black market profiteers, all kinds of global interests, groups with global interests involved, right? Transnational corporations, conglomerates, corporate partnerships, what have you. Okay. And they're manipulating both sides, and some of them are playing both sides, inevitably. Lots of them, really. And many are in the UK and America, these very influential nations, right? The next point I made was that I want the bombing campaign to stop. Okay. And again, these globalists, and some of them operate out of Egypt, certainly, don't necessarily want it to stop, even though some of them claim to be Muslims, right? And Arabs, what have you. And that's a part of the darkness of corporate partnerships that we see so commonly on this planet. The third point I made is I want all hostages to be released, and I want all Palestinian children to be released immediately and given a clean slate. Right? These are just children. They're in a very difficult situation. And I think that it would help make it so that the hostages are released. So if you say to Hamas, okay, we'll release all the children, and it's not a big deal. These are children, by the way. And if they release all the hostages, they probably would take the deal. Okay, so I think that they should do that. The fourth point I made is if Israel is to invade, they should do it quickly so that people can return home to Gaza quickly. That's self-explanatory. And the fifth point, again, was the Egyptian solution with the building, the tiny homes. Okay, and we can also fund this with wealth taxes, global wealth taxes. Okay, so point number 6. I believe that UN troops should be sent, and that reasonable wealth taxes on the world's over 50 million millionaires and billionaires should help rebuild Palestine with $100 billion or so. That would just be 2,000 each on average progressively. When you look at the military spendings of nations, you look at how much wealth is accumulated by the over 50 million millionaires and billionaires in the world. That this kind of collectively with the other point is $220 billion that I recommend is not that big of a deal. It's very doable, and the long-term benefits certainly outweigh any downside. Certainly outweigh the bill. Okay. Point number 7. Israel will get a more safe state in return, and UN troops would also be based in Israel to secure Al-Aqsa Mosque, so they have more safety, right? There's UN troops in Israel and in Palestine, okay, then Israel is more safe. And they also, can argue that there's UN troops there, right? If they think that they're so in the right, then it would help to have another group there, recording what's going on, body cameras, what have you. Okay. Point number 8. United Nations troops should be stationed for at least 50 years in Palestine, really indefinitely, so to speak, but they should be stationed there, right? So again, it's on both sides of the borders, right? Okay. Again, if you are confused, ask questions, pause it, watch it again. Don't just let this go from one ear and out the other. This is also what God wants to see, because this is justice, right? Righteousness. God's throne is established in righteousness and justice in Psalms. Everyone from the Abrahamic faiths, and really every man of every faith, and everyone from every faith should be able to appreciate why I'm right about this. These are universal principles. Okay. So, point number 9, is that where we're at here? Okay, yeah, point number 9. Israel should sign a treaty with the United Nations in Palestine that says that they can never occupy any more land in Palestine. This point is very key here. This is crucial. If Israel signs this treaty and says it can never occupy the land again, right, they can never move settlers in, what have you, then it's easier for them to argue that they're in the right. As long as that's a looming possibility that they might possibly take more land, it's nearly impossible for them to argue that they're right. And at the end of the day, whoever's right is right and whoever's wrong is wrong. And people with, basic insight or better could figure it out pretty easily. Like, I knew who was in the right or more right before I made this paper, at first glance, really. Okay. Point number 10. People should focus on their nation's proportionate equivalent of my 5 trillion redistribution plan to end homelessness, hunger, and poverty worldwide. Again, this conflict affects many nations, right? It's not just Israel and Palestine. Look at America and Canada and Australia and all these groups that weigh in on it. Look at the history of the wars with Israel, right? You had Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. Look at Iran's role, and so on and so forth. This is a very global process and event, and therefore the solution should be global. We should learn the lessons and apply them. And it has to do with poverty. It has to do with colonialism. It has to do with injustice and sexual control and monetary control. It has to do with philosophy. Okay, so I'm almost out of time here, so let's finish this off here. So basically, my 5 trillion redistribution plan is proportionate, right? So say the wealthy in America, because I've had different numbers here. They say, okay, say they had $100 trillion and the poor has $50 trillion. The poor would get another $5 trillion over 30 years, and maybe more like 5.3, and then they tax the rich, so it would go back proportionate. So as the economy grows, say the economy grew to 200 trillion for the rich and 100 trillion for the poor, then they should have 110 trillion for the poor, right, and 190 trillion for the rich, right? So it should grow proportionate, and every nation should do the same thing, right? So say there's a nation where the rich have 20 trillion and the poor have 2 trillion, okay? So the poor should have 7 trillion, the rich should have 15 trillion, but it's going to be taxed over time. So I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to have to end after this. Point number 11 is that fair and reasonable debates should be televised with an emphasis on uncontrolled opposition and logical debaters, people who are very polite when they discuss the topic.